Right, back live tonight, you're in Focus, and thanks for staying on. Defend Our Democracy has officially been launched as a civil society movement. The campaign was established 2 years ago in response to what it calls the deepening political and socio-economic crisis in the country. The group's communications officer, Nonkululeko Mntambo, joins us now to expand more on that conversation. Nonkululeko, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. A movement for civil activism. How different is the movement that we are going to be seeing now compared to, I suppose, the Defend Our Democracy campaign that has been on for the past 2 years?
Hi, thank you so much for having us. To begin with, I think by nature a campaign has to be momentary. And as you quite rightly put it, the Defend Our Democracy campaign was a direct response to an attack on the Constitution. But we found that the crisis that South Africa finds itself in is very much hinged on continuous attacks on the Constitution. So this then necessitated a more permanent response and a democracy that is tended to on a daily basis, as all democracies ought to be. And in this, the Defend Our Democracy movement has sprung. So the movement is then different from the campaign in that it is a deepening of the work that has already been established, and it's a widening of the platform in order to invite even more organizations from different sectors, civil society, organized labor, so on and so forth, to be part of this mass project towards continuously tending to the democracy of South Africa.
Yeah, you would put it maybe in a way and say you are now formalizing the work that you are already doing, probably in as far as coordinating the efforts of civil society and being some kind of convener, because we had some various civil society groups coming on this particular platform. Talk to us about what benefit has been derived from that coordination.
So it's a multiplication of effort, I think, has been the biggest benefit, not only from ourselves as Defend Our Democracy, but even for the people that we've worked with and the communities that we've worked for. What we found that ourselves on our own, as the old adage go, we can only go so far, but together we've gone further. And so your efforts such as the reopening of your Charlotte Maxeke Hospital, the investigation into the Tembisa Hospital, and many other victories which we have won together with other civil society organizations, I don't think would have been possible had we not gone together.
What informs, or even what shapes your view on what South Africans currently, broadly speaking, young and old, think about democracy? Because you're saying part of what you need to do is to stimulate public interest in democracy. And to encourage proactive, I suppose, participation in the democratic processes. What are South Africans saying about democracy?
So the current statistics show that less and less people are showing up to the polls. And in as much as we don't believe that the sum of democracy is an election, we do definitely believe that it's a key indicator for how much trust people have in the process. And we have noticed that there is a general trust deficit that people have with the government and its institutions. And so from there, I think the work of Defend Our Democracy became even more relevant, because the South African Constitution is notoriously full of potential and criminally untested at this point. I don't think people know just how much they've won in obtaining the democracy that they have. And when we push the Constitution and we test and we tend to this democracy every day, holding people to account, it is only then that we can see the fullness of what the 94 project was. So going back to your question, what we've noticed in terms of what people believe about democracy, I think there's a very genuine trust deficit. And how we respond to that is not with hope, but in holding our people in holding our leaders accountable and pressing on for the full testing of our Constitution and the full benefit of its potential.
Yeah. You see, the attainment of our democratic values and the true experience that people are currently living. I mean, if we were to just take the last 2 weeks in Hammanskraal, people having to drink dirty water,
yes.
right? In the northwest, kids being put in cardboard boxes, right? In Johannesburg, you've got young student nurses. They're just really fighting for a chance to get some kind of stipend so that they can continue to support their families. The value of human dignity seems to be something that is really, really, really a mile away for those people if you were to ask them. Would you say it's certainly the feeling across all South Africans, or are we beginning to close that gap?
I believe that feeling is very much entrenched. And it's definitely because of the failures that that people have experienced. And what I think what ourselves at Defend Our Democracy are trying to emphasize is that the individual failures come together at one point. So the cholera crisis that we're having right now is a crisis of bad governance. ESCOM is a crisis of corruption. And we can go over these examples again and again. And once people begin to demand what is owed to them very truly and what is already theirs, I think we start interacting with democracy on a very different basis, because right now I think the general feeling around democracy is who's in power and who is not. And what we're insisting on is that we are in power. We, the ordinary people of South Africa, are in power. So very definitely, especially in the eve of an election year, there is great potential to close that gap, but there is a deep morose in the country that we have to reckon with.
Yeah, how do you convince those people that we are in power if the only time that we can really seemingly exercise that power, for example, is when we have to go to vote, and that's how we can threaten politicians. They will boycott 2024, and then some kind of thing begins to happen. You see some kind of roads being fixed and so on and so forth. But in the middle of the period, there seems to be, for example, a lack of that sense. I mean, especially if you listen to the Speaker of the City of Johannesburg saying councillors there just don't even bother to attend the follow-up of the IDP meeting. So the current mayor has missed 17 of the 17 that have been set up so far. I mean, where do these people sit and get to raise these issues and hold those who are in power accountable?
I think it's a twofold thing. As Defend Our Democracy, this is the very reason why we're arguing for substantive and substantial electoral reform, because there is this absolutely unbridgeable gap between the represented and representatives. And this gap, we believe, is upheld by the manner in which we are conducting our elections at this point, and the lack of accountability that is demanded. But in terms of what we have, the situation that we have right now, and this is not to say the move for electoral reform must be abandoned. It is just we must also just understand the tools that we have right now, and this is also why the movement building and voter education and citizen education on deepening democratic cultures is so important, because there are means by which these people can be held accountable. There are stipulations for which your councillors must come to meet with you. They need to tell you your budget. They need to tell you what's happening in your neighborhood and who's going to be getting that budget and who's going to be getting certain tenders towards certain projects. These are things that are already in the rules. The problem is that no one is enforcing them, which goes back to the criminally untested constitution that we have. So it's an issue of education, but it's also an issue of very much needed change in the electoral system we have.
The big debate is around one of those issues as well that you outline as your aims, as your objectives, the attainment of equality. And there are some, for example, who will look at Defend our democracy and some of the partners that are on the platform. For example, if you talk about access to work and work opportunities and how some of those organizations, for example, would go out to court and actually fight the state in defending people from outside of the country, and they're saying this very same organization, how do you convince us that you're actually for our equality and not against?
I believe, if I'm understanding your question correctly, in terms of the separation between civil society and the general ordinary South African, am I understanding correctly?
Yeah. So,
okay.
for example, they would say there are NGOs, right, when they raise issues of jobs in the country are being taken by illegal foreign nationals, that there are NGOs who are sometimes partnering with Defend Our Democracy who would come and be in the defense of those individuals.
So I think perhaps just, and not to overplay your example, I think I understand that it is an example, but I think it is worth saying that Defend Our Democracy has taken a very sharp anti-xenophobic stance. And at the end of the day, civil society is going to have civil society organizations are going to have separate ideologies. Ours is constitutionalism, and we believe very firmly that this constitutionalism has to be rooted within the people first for it to even matter to anyone on top. There is a suspicion I can understand around the work of NGOs, but I think it's also a suspicion based on a flawed definition of what the NGO is. Your community organizations, the people who have come together to make sure people have water, people have sanitation, people are not in pit latrines, these are your NGOs. And what has been characterized as the people on top who seem to be speaking for us, I think is a bad categorization. So I suppose, to sum up, the Defend Our Democracy movement is very vested in the people's power. Yeah. And people's power has to come from the people and no one else. And the suspicion that people feel, we hope we can only assuade by the work that we have done, which anyone can go back and look to, and the work that we plan to do, which we hope most people will join us in performing.
What's your view on the instruments that we currently have of holding political parties, political leaders accountable? Are they effective?
Absolutely not. And this is, again, to the point of electoral reform. I think that in the current political arena, there's a greater allegiance to parties than people. And people are more, the representatives that we choose answer first to the parties which they come from than the people who have chosen them. So there's a middleman, so to speak, between a politician and accountability. And what the party then decides is right will then just have to be right for the rest of us. So yeah, in some, absolutely not. It's definitely not where we need to be as a country.
Yeah. So in practical terms, give me an example. How do you hold a political party accountable, for example, on its policy decisions that it takes?
So it's a multi-layered approach. I think, one, the understanding, the call for voter education is very much speaking to not only who is on the ballot, but what is on the ballot. So when people come together towards voting for a particular party, and I think you're very right in that in South Africa we use our polls to punish, and that's exactly right. We should use our polls to punish and our polls to reward. If something is not there that we believe it should be there, we should withhold or give our vote to someone. We should withhold our vote and give it to someone else. But furthermore, I think that it's also withdrawing our presence from that party and not just the vote. Because very many times we show up in great numbers to these rallies and we make people feel more important than they actually are. So speaking back to politicians is leveraging people's power and people's presence in the political arena towards getting exactly what we want.
So there was, I see and I think your lights have just gone off, and it just reminded me of this question that I wanted to put to you. That I think it was early March or so when I think the EFF was calling for a national shutdown, and one of the questions that people were asking on social media was, where are organizations like Defend Our Democracy? Why are they not supporting this shutdown when we speak of developing a societal front? What's your view on that? That as a movement, you were actually supposed to have lended your weight and be present and be out there as far as that particular call was concerned.
So ultimately, the ideology of the Defend Our Democracy is constitutionalism. And I believe the statement that was released during the time of the shutdown spoke very deeply to the threats that were being made against people who would not be striking, and also the right for people not to strike. I think it must be highlighted that Defend Our Democracy very much believes in many of the issues that were raised during the time, and not only believes in it as a hard issue, but has acted and had many victories in seeing to those issues and seeing that accountability and results are brought to the fore. However, if we are to maintain a country in which all of us can live and all of us can flourish, there's certain ways we can and cannot engage with one another. And one of those ways is forcing one another to engage in certain activities using intimidation most of all. I think as Defend Our Democracy, we've facilitated and participated in pickets, protests, sit-ins, written countless memorandums, so on and so forth. So I think it must be highlighted that the right to protest is not what's being discussed here. It is how we engage with the people that we want to protest with us. And this is not only for the day itself, but just for the sustenance of the country as a whole.
Nonkululeko, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and your intervention tonight here on In Focus. That's Nonkululeko Mntambo. She is the communications officer for Defend Our Democracy, now launching what they call a movement for activism. Right, we continue in a moment.